And with that, I would love to introduce our next speaker, Brian Sullivan, who is a Director of User Research and Design Strategy over at Sabre Corporation. And today he's going to be talking to us about the 3 lenses of design thinking, role of user research evolving into a more strategic one. Alrighty, and with that, Brian, I'm going to give you control and let you take it away.
Great. Right, let me switch real quick. And in advance, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us, and also for the Accelerant team. It's tough to put on a conference. I've had to do that in the past, and I just know how much work that goes into it. So what I'm going to talk about today is the 3 lenses of design thinking and how I believe user research is currently evolving and where it needs to go in the future. So in advance, thank you for attending today. I know you had to make some tough choices to be here. It's kind of that time of year where we've got back to school, we've got vacation, we're at work, we're finishing work. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. This is kind of an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. What is design thinking? Why is it critical to do early on? Some of the benefits. That kind of sets the ground rules. Many of you will already know it. I have a little bit of a different flavor because of the role that I play at my company. I'm going to give you the framework that I use, and it can be adapted for the 3 lenses. I call them product, service design, and business design thinking. Business design thinking is probably new to some people. Then I'm going to talk about how the future of user experience really needs to evolve and move up into this area of, I would call it next. If we think of 3 horizons, the first horizon is now, the second horizon is new, the third horizon is next. And I'll talk about that. We'll save some time for Q&A. So let's get started. So a quick introduction about me. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Here's some information about me. I'm currently the Design Strategy Director, as Sierra had mentioned. I have 25 plus years of travel experience. I'm a user researcher and a design futurist. So I tend to do my user research and my design thinking primarily in Horizon 3, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I've written a book. It's the Design Studio Method. I wrote a chapter in 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Should Know. The interesting thing is that became an Amazon bestseller. I've won a bunch of different awards and founded a conference, president of the local chapter of DFW UXPA, and I'm an adjunct professor in user experience at both SMU and UNT. If you're in the Dallas area, feel free to join us. We have a community of over 5,000 professionals, and we meet every month. Now, let's get to design thinking, how I view it. We'll walk through the framework. Then I'll talk about how we can use the 3 lenses and where I believe user experience is going, especially user research and strategy. I tend to think of design thinking as a framework, and there's a lot of freedom within the framework. And we can translate user needs into products, services, and experiences. And the beautiful thing is that we can do this in a very collaborative way. And what I found out is it yields better and more innovative solutions in the long run. Here's just a few ways that I have applied design thinking and adapted user research. I look at it with products, with processes, and really in customer engagements. And we can create a new product concept. We can redesign an entire application, maybe the next version. We can do processes. Maybe we can onboard everybody within a business unit. We might brainstorm customer value propositions. And we might even talk about how we would validate hypotheses by running rapid experiments. The way that I look at design thinking is we've got to have product, design, and tech involved. And where we see that overlapping and we're having these discussions, I think it's really good to have customers and real users involved. And if we can have commercial and sales, it's even more important because we're now talking to people on what they might want to purchase. And then commercial and sales can maybe tell us how they could structure that. There's a lot of benefits to design thinking, and you can pick out any one of them. I know, like the young lady that is here on the right of the screen, when I first learned about design thinking, I was eager. And the main reason that I was eager is that it could help me to build a product vision, but also to validate them. And I think that's important because it gets us closer to our customers. When I first started to build out the design thinking program at my company, I looked at IDEO, Stanford, IBM, and Google. I also looked at how design thinking is being used a lot for training. So if we're going to scale user research and scale design thinking, we've got to understand that there is a path forward. And this is just the number of employees that have went through some type of training like you're going through today. Now, what is design thinking? And a lot of people will ask you that. And when I break it down, design thinking really answers this one fundamental question: how can we build better products? And if you're doing service design, how can we build better services? But I would even fundamentally say, how can we build a better business? That's the third lens of design thinking. What I want to do is I want you to get out a little piece of paper or get a sticky note out, get a pen or a Sharpie, and I want you to take 1 minute to draw a vase. I like to do this exercise to kind of bring home and illustrate what does it mean to really build a better product. And a lot of times when I go through some of the big words that I had mentioned before, it doesn't really resonate with people. So I like to do these two activities back to back. So we have about 30 seconds. If you're a designer or a non-designer, that's the 30-second mark. I want you to go ahead and put a drop shadow, maybe put in some shading. And if you're really proud of your vase or vase, depending upon what part of the world you're in, go ahead and put a little signature down on the bottom right. All right, we have about 10 seconds left. We're going to finish up. And what I want you to do now is put that piece of paper to the side. If you don't like your drawing, you might want to scrap it and throw it in the recycle bin. Now what I want you to do is let's reframe the opportunity. We want to build a better product or an experience. Now I want you to take 1 minute to draw a new way of experiencing flowers in a hotel. Take it away. So if you had practice with a vase, you could still do that, or you might do something different because we've reframed the opportunity. I will stop monologuing to give you some creative space. About 30 seconds left. You probably spent a little bit more time thinking about what is that new way of experiencing flowers in a hotel than you did actually putting pen to paper. So we're wrapping up, finish up, put your drop shadow, sign your name, and we're going to continue on. Now, this particular example may seem a little silly to people, but it's not. There is a hotel in the Mojave Desert in Las Vegas called the Bellagio, and this is a picture of it. They actually took this as a design challenge to create an experience of experiencing flowers in a hotel in the desert, ladies and gentlemen. And so when you first go into the Bellagio, you can smell the flowers, you can see the flowers, you can see the vases. You can also see above you this really wonderful display of flowers. coming down and meeting you from the ceiling. As you continue to approach maybe the concierge desk, you might see this type of a floral panel. As you walk through the Bellagio, you might see these tile mosaics that show up from time to time. Again, remember, it's experiencing flowers. Sometimes it's not flowers, it's vines. And then sometimes it's not real flowers, but it's these types of art sculptures. The other thing that you might experience is gardens here. So there are flowers being used as different shapes. Notice that there's lights, different shapes of vases, different plants, and there's walkways where people can enjoy the indoor gardens that they have. In addition to that, you might see little butterflies and little types of flowers. You have another scene that's like this where there's water. They even have sound. You can hear birds chirping. You have bamboo. You do have a bridge that you can walk over. They have this really large room, and it gets transformed every year. So this is what it might look like at Chinese New Year. This is the 4th of July. This is what it looks like a little closer to Thanksgiving. Here's what it looks like at Christmas time. By the way, you want there to get a room, the floral patterns, notice the ironwork. You see 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different types of vases. You see floral colors. You see paintings, prints. When you go to the bathroom, you still have that going through the entire experience. You also have a little bit of floral aromas. By the way, the Bellagio, you can play the lotus flower slot machines. When you go outside at night, sometimes they will have this type of a digital experience. Talk about a new way of experiencing flowers in a hotel in the desert. Ladies and gentlemen, that is design thinking on steroids. So to give you an example of the type of work that I've done over the past few years with my team, I have done this many projects. During the COVID curveball, as we've all experienced, I've done product-based workshops, process or service design workshops. I've done customer engagements, and I've started to move into that next lens of design thinking, which I will call business design thinking. Again, the framework that I'm sharing with you is very flexible. So how do we innovate with design thinking, and where does user research play a role? So let me explain to you the double diamond. Many of you understand that. The first diamond is really falling in love with the problem. This is where I think user research plays its biggest role. We understand the opportunity, the pain points, the gaps, the areas of interest. And then once we can come to a focal point where the two diamonds come together, it becomes really interesting because we have alignment on what we might want to explore towards building out a solution. And we can show that to customers in many different designs. When we start to deliver that, I think it becomes another point where user research can validate these designs through to traditional usability and user research methods. This is how I tend to look at the different stages. And if we use the double diamond, we overlay it through these 6 stages, it kind of looks like this. Now, what I want to make very clear is what I'm showing you here looks very linear, but design thinking is not. The reality is that you can start anywhere in this framework. There's flexibility. You can start at the end and work your way back. You can start at the beginning. You can start at the middle. It really just depends upon what is the issue, the problem, or the opportunity that you're trying to solve. The next thing that I really love about this type of a framework, beyond its flexibility, is I think it's an accelerator. And if I had to find a synonym for the word strategy, it would be alignment. When we get that alignment, when we can all agree on what problem we want to solve, what opportunity you want to go after, it becomes pretty easy to focus our efforts and be laser focused on the solution. And that ends up being less rework. Now, I want to kind of explain to you how I think we typically work and why I see this as a pretty large accelerator when we use design thinking. Here's why I think we fail. This is a pretty interesting little image. We start with a design challenge, and at the start of it, we're super excited. We're trying to get a really good understanding. We're planning, and then we get some interest, maybe from a customer, from an executive. We may not have total alignment, but as soon as we get the go-ahead, as soon as we get the green light, kind of all hell breaks loose when we move from planning to building, because we really got to start working. There's a lot of churn that's there. The little blip that you see towards the end, it's both a good news, bad news situation. The good news is somebody's super interested in your solution. The bad news is there's probably new requirements. So when we reach that towards that end, if we didn't do design thinking, typically what we have is a sub-optimized, feature-driven solution based on a bunch of assumptions. We missed the deadline because we didn't have the alignment up front, we didn't do the user research, we didn't get the insights that we needed early on. But to give you a different view, if we had done design thinking, we had fell in love with the problem, we drove toward a solution, we tend to have a double diamond in the planning phase. So we really have a pretty good vision of what we want to build. So we get alignment on the problem, we validate that with real users, we drive that with our stakeholders, we go through a build phase. Yes, there's going to be shifts and changes. We should hit our deadline with a new user valid concept with both a prototype and a plan. But the deadline should not be pushed out. Now, this is a little bit of nirvana, but I also want to address another elephant that's in the room. I think some people talk about fail fast, fail early. I want to put it into context. When we talk about lean or design thinking, nobody wants to fail towards the end. If we fail towards the end, we're just increasing a ton of risk. We've got to deploy resources. There's more money. But if we allow time for rapid experiments early, we can adapt. We can learn. There's less risk. There's more research that's involved here. And I think it's just flipping the type of research that we do. Now, I want to give you the basic walkthrough of the 6 stages that I've been talking about at a really high level, and I want to go granular. Then I'm going to go through how we can use these through the 3 different lenses. Then I want to explain that's still not enough. We need to do more, because what we need to do is level up our insights. We've got to drive to a future vision so that we can really build better products, services, and our own businesses, ladies and gentlemen. So the first thing that I want to do, stage 1, is framing the opportunity. We need to really kind of agree on our starting point for all of our future discussions. Charles Kettering, founder of Delco, once said, a well-stated problem is half solved. So when we're doing framing the opportunity, we really want to identify a specific problem, because that's the single most important factor of success. If you're addressing the wrong one, you're probably going to get a lot of false positives, and you're not giving users what they want, or more importantly, what they need. Now, I think that a lot of times our engineers and technologists within our team tend to really frame the opportunity in a much different way than we do. Design is intentional. It must be for a specific person, it must be for a specific business opportunity, and it must be measured in an exact way. Technologists tend to do, how do we solve it? If we frame the opportunity in terms of a who, what, wow, it's much more important and it's more impactful, both to the users and to the business. The next thing that I like to do when I first come into any type of a kickoff meeting or a workshop, I like to have what I call a project definition worksheet. I have people fill out the same types of questions. It's almost like a pre-buttal, because if they can fill this out, I can quickly read it, maybe have a quick follow-up meeting with them and make sure I have a good understanding of what they want. Here are some of the things that you might find within the worksheet. I like to give people about an hour to do this. The most important thing is competitive differentiation. And what are the metrics that matter? I think the competitive differentiation is important because people pay more for that. Once they do that, I like to hear what I call an elevator pitch, a 2-minute readout. Now, you've heard of the term elevator pitch. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine the elevator only has 2 floors. So I like to use this fill in the blank template. Our project is called blank. It's kind of like blank. The person or group who uses it is blank. They struggle because of these reasons. In a perfect world, they'd be able to do this, and it would be awesome because of this. Within this template, you can kind of clearly see the who, what, wow. If we can get that initial alignment, then we drive all of that into the first diamond. And again, this is just the starting point, the initial tipping point. Then it's really about real deep user research and empathy. We want to know how people work, what do they want, what do they need. I really like this quote from Scott Cook, where he says, you can't walk a mile in someone else's shoes until you take your own shoes off. I'll just say amen to that. I think to learn anything meaningful about our users, we need to talk to them and we need to observe them, especially in their natural environment. That's where the best data comes from. And you can kind of more easily see pain points and gaps when you're talking or observing people. So I like to do things maybe a little bit differently than other user researchers and strategists, and that I tend to ask for a broad range of stakeholders, but I also want to look at the users. So one of the first things that I do is I build a stakeholder map. I like the stakeholder map because I want to know who's who in the zoo and what do they do. Now, one of the things that you'll see here that's a little bit different than other people is the arrows that you see on the right. That's kind of the relationship status, if you will, between the different players. A dark black arrow here on the whiteboard means they have a very strong relationship. If it's a normal arrow, it means it's basically normal. If it's a dashed arrow, it's a weak relationship. If it's non-existent, I tend to make it not a solid arrow, but you see the edges, but you can't really see through it. You see through it, there's no black. That's just to kind of get a view of the ecosystem, who I'm dealing with, look at potential bottlenecks, maybe some opportunities. What I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, when you first kick off a project, stakeholders make or break every single project. That's why I tended to shift to this type of a tool, just to figure out who's who in the zoo and is there a conversation I need to have. The next thing I do is I build an empathy map. Most people know what that is. What does someone say, think, do, or feel when they're going through an experience? I think one of the things that I learned pretty early on when I'm gathering my insights, why do you feel that way, right? And be more specific. So qualifying an empathy map with the real user is important. Now, empathy maps sometimes are filled with a lot of assumptions. It's not a replacement for real user research. And in fact, if you do real user research up front, you can use an empathy map to synthesize it. It's almost like a data collector. One of the things that I like to do within an empathy map is I talk about this concept called design drivers. If we want to level up our insights, which insights are the most important specifically to the customer we're going after? We might want to ask ourselves, hey, where are we making assumptions? If there's an assumption, we might need to do more research. We might need to follow back with that person. The last thing I think that's more important is of any of these patterns, and again, we see them in the green sticky notes, are those translating into design themes, things that we need to keep top of mind when we start to explore the context of how this person operates within a journey map. If you've got a pretty good understanding of an empathy map, I tend to build a high-level user persona. I like mine to be research-based. And you can see here that the design drivers are right in the middle. That's the thing that's most important. It's what we gotta keep top of mind. Some of the things that are on the bottom are the context, the pain points, and some of the motivations and goals of an individual. I've had my team develop 72 research-based user personas. I also use a concept known as extreme users. So I will have kind of our mainstream user. So for instance, a frequent business traveler. If we go to one extreme, an infrequent business traveler. The other extreme might be a VIP business traveler. So I kind of have that type of layering put within the user persona library. And when you get deeper and richer insights, again, the extremes tend to maybe pull out information that you might not see from the mainstream users. Again, the empathy maps can be used for the user personas. I've got them in a persona library. It's easy to access. The personas act as a lens into a journey map. So the current state journey map gives you the context into the reality that a person is feeling and the pressure points that they have. You can't have a presentation without a Steve Jobs quote. So here is the obligation that I have to Steve Jobs. Most people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And to me, that speaks to context. New solutions are really produced by mapping a current experience or a similar one and highlighting user pain points and gaps. Then you can build out future state solutions based on that. A little bit of what I call the Texas two-step. So it's easy to fall back into the trap of being product-centric, which is what we see on the left. We need to really train our stakeholders to be user-centric. And here's just some of the questions that we need to do. I think a lot of times, okay, we've collected this information in the user personas. I know what to do. Now, wait a second. Let's now apply that to context, right? Let's be outwardly focused, not inwardly focused on how do we make money? How do we reach our goals? So this is a product-centric view. And again, this might look like a backlog, right? It's stuff you should already be working on. A user-centric view of travel: prepare, shop, book, plan, pack, travel, maybe do some excursions, enjoy your destination and come back. If we put it at a high level into a journey map, you would have the stages out front. You'd have a list of activities. Here's a pro tip, ladies and gentlemen. When you're dealing with customers, have the stages and the activities already mapped out and validated. If you don't do that, you're going to have one person say, well, I do it this way. Well, I do it this way. Don't co-create stages, tasks, and activity in session. Have them quickly validate them and then go to the current state challenges they're having. Have them map that out. Here's an example of what it looked like in a pretty recent strategy workshop that I did. And again, this is really important. If you have customers involved, the product manager can hear the conversations that they're having. What's important to me may not be what's important to someone else. The pink stickies that you see at the top is a logical grouping of the major issues that they're seeing. If you have a wall of sticky notes, pain points, opportunities, areas of interest, one way to quickly refocus or synthesize the data is to have need statements. Again, I like to call these a who, what, wow. This is a bad example because probably what a product person is doing is they're inserting the solution into the need, and really the dashboard and all the data in one place is more that product manager is trying to insert themselves. A better example is the hotel agent wants to see packages arriving today, just so she has better customer service and knows when they arrive. So need statements are a way to quickly synthesize pain points, areas of interest, and gaps. Once you've done that, it's the second part of the Texas two-step. What is the future direction? This is where we ideate. So if you've got some pain points and you've synthesized that, or the key user need statements, then we start to ideate. I love this quote from Ed Catmull, where he says in the beginning, all of our movies suck. The future is not the destination, it's a direction. And especially at this point, we haven't really started to visualize it. New solutions are made again by mapping the current experience and highlighting them. We did that when we built out the current state journey map and we highlighted that. Then the things that they vote on the most, let's then brainstorm ways to improve it. So really, we're kind of right here in the double diamond. So if the current issues lead to future solutions, this is where we build our future direction. So we brainstorm those future state products, services, and experiences. I like to use what's called big idea vignettes. So have a little image with a brief caption. Big ideas are broad, conceptual, user-focused. They're not features. Again, it's easy to fall into that trap of the backlog. So try to make it broad and conceptual, not too specific at this point. Have a sketch, a headline, and a caption. And again, this leaves enough room to explore. There's many different ways to produce different features. There's different products or services that fall under a security concierge big idea. After they do some big idea vignettes, I like to have them cluster, see if we have some patterns towards that initial solutioning. I might have them vote on the top clustering. I like to use a prioritization grid here. And I use a wave chart. So there's no-brainers, performance payoffs, and differentiators. I think a lot of times people might focus on no-brainers to quickly resolve resolutions for customers. But the more interesting ideas, and customers tend to pay more for differentiators. And it's really how you beat the snot out of the competition. Performance payoffs are we're better, faster, more efficient, better data quality. There's an interesting thing that happens in session with customers when they start to debate between differentiators, performance payoffs, and unwise ideas. I think that's gold right there, not just for user researchers, but really for product managers. So I have them put them on the chart. It might look like this. And we still need to further describe each of the big ideas. This is when we lean heavily into defining the new concept. We kind of revisit the who, what, wow statement, but it's more from a solutioning perspective. Albert Einstein once said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about it and 5 minutes solving it. Again, let's align on the problem so that the solution becomes laser focused. Again, defining the new concept is essential so that it resonates with users, the product team, and really more importantly, the customers and your executives. We revisit the who, what, wow statement. It looks like this. This comes from IBM Design Thinking. Here's an example from IBM Bluemix. I think it should take no more than 30 minutes for a developer to build and run an app using IBM and third-party APIs. Here was one that was produced a couple of years ago in a project that I was in. It drove alignment. It usually takes an hour or so. And the thing to level up here is the wow, not the how, the wow. Then it's creating a prototype. We kind of get more into the groove. This is kind of where we live and play as product designers and user researchers. I love this quote from John Maeda: if a picture is worth 1,000 words, prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. Again, I'll give an amen to John there. Again, prototypes allow us to visualize our ideas and refine them and to experiment quickly. Business requirements can be easily misinterpreted. There's really two ways to build prototypes: storyboards and interactive prototypes using a tool like Figma. I like to also say to people, just remember, everything starts with a sketch. You can make it low fidelity and then higher fidelity. Sketches can be rapidly iterated with your customers. There's no special design skills needed. I've outlined in that in my book, The Design Studio Method. Again, low fidelity tools drive high fidelity ideas. We can quickly test sketches using the Marvel app. The other thing I like to do with customers and maybe some of our stakeholders is talk about the difference between criticism and critiquing. Criticism feels very personal. It's usually negative, it's very opinionated, it's also vague. Critiquing, on the other hand, is collaborative. It's more about the idea, not the person. It's very concrete. What I teach my grad students is a really simple tool. I wonder. Rose, thorn, bud is another approach that can be used too. And here's an example of a designer and a product manager using I wonder. It's not enough to just create a prototype. We've got to validate it. It's best to validate it with real users. So this is where Steve Krug comes in. The single best thing you can do, friend, to improve a product is a usability test. And again, I think now this is very logical. We all understand that, but not that long ago, people just didn't regularly do it. Now, prototype validation lets you know how well your solution can be used and learned. You want to do that early, you want to do that often. Rather than doing it with designers, I would suggest you even push it further, more into that Horizon 3 that I was talking about. I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, why do we validate with real users? To test our assumptions, validate, perform experiments, fail fast, fail early, fail often, test, iterate, the rapid experiments that I talked about before. Now, we want to validate with users, not buyers. It's important, but buyers have different needs. Roberto here is really thinking about training and scaling it versus Christina, she just wants to get people onto an airplane that are queued up. So both are very important, but you really want to validate a prototype with real users and then kind of explain it to the IT buyer. Again, 5 to 6 users uncover the vast majority of issues. It's per user group though. This tends to shock people. But I want to now switch gears so that I think everybody kind of has an understanding of design thinking, and that's product design thinking. How do we integrate that into leading practices, and then how do we level up everything? So again, here's our double diamond. Let's align on understanding the opportunity, designing the solution. We've kind of went through all of that in a really fast way today. And again, I think understand we can start anywhere. But if we look at this, we can kind of layer in design thinking, lean and agile into more of a plan, build, run type of way. And this is kind of how I see things playing off. I usually start super early with design thinking and research. As we start to go in more to a concept validation, there's some lean coaches and some agile coaches that I tend to work a little bit more with, and then they start to take over. Again, this is a flexible framework that fits in nicely with our other partners. And if you look at it, there are certain things that are similar with lean startup, agile, and design strategy. I've kind of outlined them here. Now, the 3 lenses of design thinking, I have to go through all of that really long intro to get to the meat of what I really want to talk about today. So product design thinking can look like this. We can do evolutionary innovation, move from a version 1 to a version 2. Maybe we're downloading the latest update from Netflix, or maybe the latest update for our phone. That's moving from a version 1 to version 2. Sometimes that's really fast. Sometimes it's not. It just depends upon how big the problem or opportunity is we're wanting to explore. That's evolutionary innovation. There's a lot of money in evolutionary innovation. There's a lot of brand resonance there. But you also, with product design thinking, you can do revolutionary innovation. You might have a new idea and introduce a completely new product. So imagine switching from a BlackBerry to an iPhone back in the day, or purchasing an electric car versus a gas-powered vehicle, right? Or building a new module onto something. That's revolutionary innovation at a product level. Service design thinking, and I think Jen's going to talk about that next. You might want to rethink handoffs from internal teams, optimize how people work, take a manual process and automate it. You might want to create a touchless experience because of a global pandemic, right? So I think we've done real-time service design and appreciated a lot more because of COVID. But this is really everything outside of a computer screen, outside of maybe your phone, right? So it's calling a help desk, right? Interfacing with a sales agent at the Apple store. All of those are service design. Now I want to talk about business design thinking, the third lens. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can perform user research and prototype businesses. Think about your current business model, or maybe you want to completely transform or disrupt a specific industry. You might take a current business model, run it through design thinking, and go through these stages and reimagine or create a new and improved business model. You might want to redefine customer value propositions. Maybe you look at the business needs to understand early adopters. Who are the key partners? Maybe you want to build, buy, or partner with someone. What are revenue streams? What are rapid experiments that you might run to validate assumptions, right? So let's look at that for a moment. So I went through all of the different product design techniques that I use. Here are some experiments that you might run. This is at a product and really kind of at a service level. But if we're validating a business, right, we can use the product canvas or the business model canvas, and we run a different set of experiments to make sure that this business model is a little bit stronger. Now, I know many people that are on the call have talked about and learned design sprint. I actually think we need to move into innovation sprinting. When we kickstart a project, whether it's product design or service design, what is the business model? What is the customer value proposition? How do we test with real world people up front to validate all of our hypotheses and assumptions, synthesize that, throw that back into the business model? And again, I think that's how we can transform business. And again, UX design evolves kind of into innovation, where we validate the problem, the market, the solution, and people's willingness to pay. Strategizer is a great company that has been instrumental into really having me rethink the way that I do my own user research practice at my company. Here's some other resources that I think you might want to look at. Value proposition design, business model generation, and testing business design, or I'm sorry, testing business ideas. Testing business ideas is a really great way to quickly learn about new ways to test out your business ideas, your hypotheses, and your assumption. There's also a really great site called Learning Loop that has playbooks. And between these two, you'll have an entire new toolkit as a professional to provide value. And this is to business owners, to the C-suite people. Now, the future of UX is really to move into strategic priorities at a business level. Often I hear user researchers and designers say, I want a seat at the table, and they're really not ready for it. They probably would have a seat at the table, but it would look like a baby in a high chair. Until we can shift our thinking, make it a little bit more mature, so that we're thinking about the business model, the customer value propositions, and validating them at a higher level, I don't think we're going to have a really good seat, and I don't think people will take us seriously initially. So again, current state reality, future state solution. We're now here, right? If we're doing business design thinking, user research and design validates sustainable business models that make differentiated products that's really hard for our competitors to replicate easily, and that makes it sustainable. We can also take our timelines, work with our product management people, and then start to accelerate our timelines. A lot of times, the natural tendency is for us to build, but we could also buy or partner with people. Buy has two flavors. We might buy services from a company. Maybe there's a tool set, and we buy those services and we accelerate a timeline. Or we might buy a startup, and there's something that we could use. There's a lot of startups doing really cool stuff with AI, machine learning, and APIs. Or you can do a blended model, right? And then the next thing is, let's think about it in terms of the three horizons. UX currently does a good job at building the now, but we also need to work on the new. And I think we've started to move there. But we also need to go into that space of imagining the next, building a new way of thinking about our practice. Think of it, ladies and gentlemen, as you're in a car, and the biggest thing in your car is your windshield, right? You do have the rear view mirror, and as you're driving down the road, you're kind of reacting to the cars around you. The cars that are around you, that's going to be your competition, right? That's going to, in some ways, be in-house systems with your customers. We're reacting to that, right? Horizon 2, that's going to be those cars that are maybe 3, 4, 5 cars up, right? And you need to kind of anticipate where they might go, and you might have to quickly adjust. Typically, that in terms of a time frame for a business, that's 1 to 2 years. You're already making those plans now. It's kind of that time of year. But you know what, if you're driving down the road, you're looking out that windshield. If you're going to the future where you want to change the game, where you want to disrupt it, that's about 5 years down the road, ladies and gentlemen. And that's going to be around the corner, maybe the next city. But if you don't start to plan for that now, you're probably never going to get there. And I really think that the fundamental question that we should ask ourselves as user researchers is no longer really, can we build better products and services? We have all the tools to do that now. I think the future of UX research is to really ask ourselves, what future do we want to explore together? And if we do that using design thinking, maybe in a new way, where it's not just products and services, but it's also with business models, because we can prototype them. We can validate the problem, the product, the market, people's willingness to pay. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave it there. I want to give a special shout out to Bill McDowell and Sierra Thomas for their help today. Sierra, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share and answer any questions that people might have.
All righty. Thank you so much, Brian. That was wonderful. I always love hearing about design thinking, and it's wonderful hearing about how it's applicable to everyone and not just designers.
Yeah.
So I'm going to check real fast for some questions. I saw one pop up. Is this presentation going to be available later? So we will be sharing all presentations that are allowed by the companies that are sharing here. So if Sabre allows us to share this presentation, it will be shared. If not, it was because of a confidentiality reason. Any other questions? I am refreshing some pages right now to see. I do have one of my own while while I'm waiting for these to load. When you were mentioning the starting point way back at the beginning about framing the opportunity, have you ever run into a situation where you got halfway through a project and you realized that the opportunity was totally different than what you originally framed it as?
Yeah, I think it's a flexible framework. If that happens, you go back and reframe the opportunity. If you have other people there, they can challenge you very early on. Again, it's the starting point of all future discussions. It doesn't mean you kind of do that steady state march towards something. You can always go back.
Alrighty, awesome. We have another question. What does Brian think the biggest opportunity is that we can do, that we can do to have a seat at the table as UX researchers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that what I was trying to lay out here, you need to understand the business, and you need to understand the business really well, and not just the business at a domain level. I want you to think about it in terms of how work gets done just at any company. A company's job is to, again, if it's a for-profit company, it's to make money. If it's a nonprofit, it's to serve the community, right? Figure out what those values are, and then figure out what those drivers are. Once you do that, the single best thing that you can do, and again, I tend to be a visual person, you need to be an asterisk at your company. Literally, you need to go up, down, across, and sideways so that you can break through what I call there's this permafrost layer at every company, and you got to be able to break through it. You do that usually with allies, and you've got to be available to adjust quickly. But to me, I think what I've done is I've always had an ending point, and I've always tried to upsell from there. Oh, a usability test, great. What if we did rapid iterative testing? Oh, that's awesome. What if we did a design studio? Oh, that's awesome. What if we did user research? Oh, that's awesome. What if we did design thinking? Oh, that's awesome. What if I worked with you on doing business design thinking? So there's ways to do it to where you can always upsell.
Always be selling, isn't that the term?
Always be selling, always be closing. That's right. ABC, always be closing.
Actually, when your Steve Jobs quote came up, it jogged a memory for me of a quote from Henry Ford, I believe, that was, if I had asked what people wanted, they would have told me faster horses.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing when we go into Horizon 3, people will get a little bit nervous. There's some research by a gentleman by the name of Jim Dator, D-A-T-O-R. Typically, there's 4 outcomes for any decision. You have kind of business as usual, you have growth. You could also have decline, right? And, some people think business as usual is boring, right? But going to church, going to synagogue, some people really like that, right? I'm one of those people that like going to church. Then it's declining. So there's a sudden decline. Well, the collapse of the Berlin Wall is a pretty good example of that. That was already happening. And when it happened, it was so sudden. The third way that the future can change, you can have a transformation. And the transformation usually is by choice. So the underlying systems or business models, they change intentionally. A good example of that would be Uber. Uber changed the business model for how you do and get from point A to point B. It's no longer a taxi. You can take an Uber, right? And so the whole systems underneath it changed. And that's what was called transformation. The fourth way is it's called a new equilibrium. So the underlying systems are basically the same. They're just put to another use. So a really good example of that would be airport security after 9/11. There's a big external force. We have to make an adjustment. So all of a sudden, we're using sensors for human bodies. There's always been conveyor belts to move stuff around. We build lines, we do stuff like that. But there's typically 4 futures. So when I was talking about Horizon 3, understand growth, decline, transformation, new equilibrium. Which is it? Typically, it's all 4. It's not an either or. That was a trick. Some things are growing, some things are declining. The tech will stay the same. Sometimes it's different. But if you kind of have that in your head when you're playing in Horizon 3, that kind of helps you to frame your user research. I didn't add that in the slide, but you got the voiceover.
Yeah. No, I thank you for adding that. We still have 4 more minutes. I wanted to ask, with the transformation part, is that always a transformation by choice, or does that include transformation by need as well?
It's usually, that this is another thing that I didn't add. So when you look at a business model, right? So I remember how I said I was a futurist. So if you have a business model, and let's just say that this is the business model, you have forces that are coming in. So some of those might be governmental. You have other forces that are market-based. You have other that are economic. Hey, inflation, y'all, right? You also have just kind of market-based trends specific to an industry. So what a company might decide to do because of the stress that's being put on that business model is say, hey, we no longer think that this is a viable option. Because of that, we choose to invest into a tech transformation, right? And so maybe it's going off of mainframe to cloud, but it could be kind of a combination of, hey, we want to do this because our customers want it, or we want to do this as a company to save money or some hybrid in between? It was a great question. It's a great question. I also don't have those slides in this presentation. I have in another one.
Maybe another conference then. We'll
Maybe.
have to have you back at some point.
All right, cool.
Alrighty, I'm going to do one more scan just to